episode of the Power Transformation Podcast. I am your host, Alethea Felton, and today's guest, Kimberly Spencer. Oh my goodness, you all, she is absolutely amazing. And I'm going to jump right into this interview of Kimberly, but I want to make an announcement up front about Kimberly. When I interviewed her, her book was not yet published, but now it is. And I need you to write down this title: Make Every Podcast Want You. Make Every Podcast Want You. Yes, that is the title of her #1 best seller. And Kimberly is so much more than just a best-selling author, but she is a game changer. She is a renowned TEDx speaker, entrepreneur, founder of various companies, including Communication Queens Agency, which is a marketing agency that pairs business owners with podcasts. And there's so much more that we're going to get into, but I wanted to put that up front to make that announcement that Kimberly's book is out and you want to get it today. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. So Kimberly certainly has a transformative story that is going to be valuable and meaningful. And I want to thank you for tuning in to this podcast today, and go ahead and follow, as well as share this episode with at least 5 people that you know. Share this with 5 people that you know. And Kimberly herself is a podcaster. She has a top 2% podcast that's called the Crown Yourself podcast that I want all of you also to support. Let's go ahead and start with our affirmation. I'll say it once and then you repeat it. My voice and story are valuable, and they help me build meaningful connections to achieve my goals. I am thrilled today to have Kimberly Spencer here. And as you heard from the introduction, Kimberly is just a superwoman. That's what I like to call her. But she has the greatest personality. She is so insightful. And this is sure to be more than just a Q&A, but we are going to really learn so much about transformation, empowerment, and so much more from Kimberly. So Kimberly, welcome to the Power Transformation Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on, Alethea. I am so honored to be here with such a beautiful soul who every time I see you, you are always so colorful. So I wear my bright sparkly colors just for you.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. I have my little pop of pink fuchsia here today. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. So Kimberly, I want us to just dive deeply into this interview already. And let's go ahead and start with something fun and lighthearted so that we can get to know you a bit better. So Kimberly, here is the question to get us started. As a kid, what was your favorite childhood cereal?
Oh. That's a tough one because I wasn't allowed to eat cereal.
You weren't, really?
No, my mom was like a total health nut, total health junkie. But back in the 80s, early 90s, healthy cereal tasted like crap. And it was you had the health food Pop-Tarts that were just tar, basically. They were just
okay. So look, I have a wild card question then, okay? Okay. Yes or no, did you like going to the mall growing up?
Loved going to the mall.
Okay, so
yes.
Tell us, okay, perfect. No problem at all. So tell us, what was one of your favorite stores you used to like to frequent in the mall?
Oh, I loved Claire's. This is where I got my ears pierced for the first time. And then I loved this store called Contempo because it felt so, it was an older store. Even my mom had shopped there back in the 60s, and I think it went out of business now, but it had very funky, more mature clothes. I've always when I was 12, I've always acted older. I always knew that when I was a kid, I was when I hit my 30s, I'll actually feel my age.
Wow.
It has become true. When I was 17 or 16, I got chosen to be a part of this like screenwriters um workshop where I got mentorship, and I would go in, and the screenwriters were like, "Oh, are you a like?" Because I would be dressed in like my little Diane von Furstenberg wrap dress, and like,
Yeah.
and they were like, "You're like 32, right?" And I was like, "I'm 16." Total jailbait.
Wow. Contempo. Now, I've never heard of that. I grew up on the East Coast in southeastern Virginia, and that's one store I don't know about. So I'm going to have to Google that to see what Contempo was all about. But I brought up the mall because the mall was all the rage back in the day. Like everybody went to the mall. It was just the hangout spot, and malls are slowly fizzling away, but it's still nice to talk about them. So thank you for that, but always have a wild card just in case. But anyway, Kimberly, in getting into the heart and the crux of who you are, Kimberly, who is Kimberly Spencer?
I mean, I could define myself by my roles, like
Mhm.
mom of two, business owner, CEO, entrepreneur, coach, like, you know, former screenwriter, former e-commerce business owner. Like, I've had a
Mhm.
lot of different roles, but underneath the through line of my roles and all the various career shifts that I've had has been that I'm a storyteller. And I've
Mm.
always been in the business of transforming people's stories, whether it was
Wow.
teaching Pilates and transforming what was possible for a woman's body postpartum, or transforming people's stories with their back stretching device, or using and leveraging a freestyle motocross movie that I never thought would, save lives. To this day, I know has saved 3 lives just because of the
Mm.
level of storytelling that it had about, the dark path that drugs, alcohol, and rock and roll
Yeah.
lead to. And that's all. And whether, coaching, and now, with our podcast guesting agency, we are putting people's stories out into the world to
Yeah.
help more people's stories be transformed, because that's how we learn, that's how we evolve, that's how we've evolved since the beginning of time, has been through stories.
So when we hear you say transforming stories, what does that look like?
Well, for my story, initially, it started out because I grew up with a very highly codependent mother and a alcoholic addict for a father. And my dad was a very highly functioning addict. So I watched them over the course of 30 years build a very successful multi-million dollar business
Mhm.
over the course of 30 years. But in the initial stages, my mom was pushing me around in the stroller growing up, passing out flyers. But the problem is when you grow up in a home with an addict, like there were many, many instances of different forms of abuse
Mhm.
that happened behind closed doors. So people who knew my dad never would have thought he would have done some of the things that he did. Even some of the closest family members, they didn't know until recently, till I started sharing part of our story, which I told him, like, he wanted us to share. He wanted me to share our story later on, once after I'd staged his intervention in 2016. And
Mhm.
I said, Dad, there are certain things like just sexual abuse that I won't share until after you've passed, simply because I know how people will perceive it.
Yeah.
And I know who you are now and how you've transformed. And my dad is like, up until the time that he passed, like, he stayed sober off of alcohol. That was one of his proudest things. And I knew that the version of my dad had died who did that to me when he got sober. Because
Yeah.
the alcohol, like, I grew up with 4 dads. I grew up with the alcoholic dad, the stoner
Mm.
dad, the opioid
Mhm.
addicted dad, and then the cool sober dad. And each one had their own personalities.
Yeah.
The alcoholic one was the most dangerous. And
Wow.
when he quit alcohol in 2016 and was fully sober and also wanted me to start sharing my story, I said, I will do that after you've passed, because I think
Mhm.
that I just wanted to honor who he was and who he had transformed himself to be. Like, he's the greatest story that you can actually transform your life at 70 years old. So that was
Yeah.
but growing up through that, like, because of those experiences, I thought that I was broken, damaged, and a victim. And it took years, like decades, for me to see my wholeness, to heal from the abuse at my own hand. Like, I started being bulimic when I was very, very young, 11
Mhm.
years old. And then that lasted until my early 20s. And that was my way of coping, my way of control, and also my way of modeling addiction in my own way. And it was through healing that with no psychological or medical intervention that I realized my own power, that I realized the power
Mhm.
of our own thoughts and the power of our own stories, and how the stories that we typically tell ourselves are not true and are
Mhm.
completely made up. So the story that I was broken, damaged, and a victim, totally made up.
Wow.
Like totally in my head, because at my heart and soul, at who I am at my core, I'm whole, I'm perfect, I am holy. Like I am
Mhm.
a beautiful being in this lovely little meat sack.
And Kimberly, that is loaded. I mean, so much that you have experienced has led you to being who you are now. And more specifically, let's talk about this breakthrough. So when was that pivotal moment, Kimberly, when changing your internal narrative actually led to a significant breakthrough in your life?
It actually started with changing my environment. So when I
Mm.
was 19 years old, I dropped out of college 2 weeks before I was supposed to start with two college
Wow.
scholarships. And because my parents were entrepreneurial, they saw how entrepreneurial I was for the entertainment industry. And I got a side job, a bridge job as a Pilates instructor. And it was once I saved up enough to move out of my family's home, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. Like I saved up, I got my own place. Changing your environment, changing who you surround yourself with on a daily basis has radical transformation possibilities. And that doesn't necessarily just have to mean you have to move, because sometimes that's not an option at the moment. But that change of environment, it wasn't just moving out and moving on my own, but it
Mhm.
was also moving into where I was pursuing my dream as, in Hollywood at that time and writing movies. And I got my first opportunity to, write a feature film. And I was simultaneously teaching Pilates, where I was around for 10 hours a day, teaching and hearing new people's stories. And our brains are wired to survive, they're not wired to thrive. And so when you expose yourself to other people's stories, like what you're doing on this podcast,
Mhm.
like Alethea, like that's why I love going on podcasts and getting other people on podcasts, because I like to think of it as kind of like the Pilates studio for your ears. Like you're just
Mm.
working out your brain.
Yeah.
And because I was exposing myself to 10 new stories a day, 5 days a week, sometimes with an extra 6 hours on the weekend, like that was automatically allowing me to see different belief systems where I was like, oh, wait, maybe this belief system that I'm not going to be successful because of my background or my childhood or certain things that I experienced, maybe this belief system isn't actually true. Maybe this belief system that I'm going to end up having the same, relationship with, my partner, isn't actually true. And I
Mhm.
started to see these belief systems of different people just by having conversation and the power of healing in relationship. Like no one really heals in a silo. And so it was through experiencing other people's stories, through also changing my environment, that I then started to question my own story. I started to question, like, wow, I'm going into this binge and purge cycle. What triggered that? Like, what was the initial
Mhm.
emotion that triggered that? And within 2 years, I had completely healed from an eating disorder that had plagued my life, and for 8 years prior. And it only took 2 years.
And earlier, you even mentioned something that's quite extraordinary is that you said that you did it without a psychological or medical intervention. What gave you that willpower to say, regardless, I'm going to change my story?
Well, I think on the one hand, like I think psychological and medical intervention does have its place.
Mhm, of
Um,
course.
for me, I didn't grow up in a family that really supported that. And so I
Mm.
didn't see that as a resource. So I looked to alternative methods.
Okay.
I looked to somatic methods to be able to start working through the body. I didn't know that by teaching Pilates, I was actually healing my nervous system. I was actually teaching my body to then regulate from that heightened sympathetic state that you have when you're living with an addict. You're always on that like fight, flight, freeze, who's coming through the door, how do I need to adapt my behavior, because you're expecting the worst, and because you're preparing for safety. So I was on
Mm.
high alert constantly. But when I started teaching Pilates, I was retraining my nervous system to have oscillation. And our bodies are naturally meant to have oscillation between sympathetic, because sympathetic is great. You're going for a goal.
Mm-hmm.
You want to kick a ball into the goal, shoot a basket. You need your sympathetic nervous system because it's getting you revved up. But you also want to be able to decelerate. And I was not good at decelerate. I would freeze. I would get feisty. But those spaces, like I wasn't able to successfully decelerate. Pilates and somatics really helped me to do
Mm-hmm.
that. I didn't know it was helping me to do it at that
Yeah.
time. But I was starting to have more regulation. And that's because my nervous system biologically was getting more regulated. I was able to start questioning my thoughts. When you're in a heightened sympathetic state, you aren't able to question your thoughts. Your brain is literally hijacked, your amygdala is
Mm-hmm.
hijacked to think only of safety. So when I could regulate, like I do believe in working from the physiology as well as the mental realm. And
Mm-hmm.
so both are necessary, because if you're constantly trying to like fight your way through the thoughts, but your nervous system is like on high alert, you're fighting against yourself. You're swimming upstream.
Mm. I think just the fact you were able to recognize that at such a younger age, especially with the fact that you experienced a lot of this trauma through childhood. And when you pursued your goals in Hollywood and whatnot, you made up in your mind that you were determined to go from that state of survival into a shifting into doing your best to thrive. And for you to have been so young along the way, while you did certain things that were more naturally based, tell us about any key people that you met who helped to pour into your cup, so as to speak, and got you to also shift the trajectory and the plan for your life.
I definitely would say my first support was that my cranial sacral therapist,
Mm-hmm.
Janine Brema. She's amazing.
Wow.
And she was my support. She actually was the one who married my husband and I.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Like
wow.
years,
How
years
beautiful.
later. But she really helped, because with cranial sacral therapy, what you're doing is basically you're reprogramming the tissue of the body. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you've had any sort of like physical abuse, your subconscious mind runs your body. And
Yes.
so sometimes even if you kind of heal subconsciously and you bring these things to light and these
Mm-hmm.
old memories and you start to work through them and you understand why and you see how they happen for you, not to you, they still are stuck in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And so what
Exactly.
cranial sacral therapy really helped to do was to unravel and remove that from my body. And I fell very I fell in love with this modality as my first modality of healing and support
Mm-hmm.
when I got badly burned, physically. I went to the movies, and like a genius, I decided to bring a big bowl of pho.
Oh.
Right? Yeah, not the smartest idea. And
Uh-huh.
this was like McDonald's lawsuit worthy, scalding hot. And I
Uh-huh.
was pouring the noodles watching this movie. It was like a documentary on Earth or something. And suddenly like it spills out, splatters all over my legs. And I'm like,
Oh,
this is
no.
a serious burn. The paramedics had to come. They had to cut the pants
Oh,
like up off my leg. Well, simultaneously, here's the interesting part. I didn't realize that my first love, first of many things, first boyfriend was there at that same movie theater with the woman
oh,
that he was cheating on me with. And so burned metaphorically, burned physically. And there was this dance. And this was one of the moments that I realized like a superpower, basically one of my superpowers is like this heightened intuition of like something's off. And I knew that the
mhm.
physical, like when I discovered that later, I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly why I burned myself.
Wow. Oh my
And
goodness.
but that experience, so then one of my clients in Pilates, she had
Mhm.
fibromyalgia and she was
Yes.
going and getting regular cranial sacral therapy. And she said I would have, and I came in like with bandages on my legs, and I
Mhm.
had gone to see the
Mhm.
dermatologist, and he was like, oh yeah, that's gonna scar. And I was like, that
Mm.
can't scar. It was like the size of two of my handprints. And I said, it can't scar. Like I had like a modeling gig that was coming up, and I was like, I can't, like I have to be in a bikini. Like that's not
Mhm.
okay. And he was like, and so I said, I'll do anything. And so my client recommended this. And I said, whatever, I'll try it. And it was the first time because you have to go through an assessment. And she asks like on the assessment, all of the things. And I was just in such a place of vulnerability. I was like, all right, you want all the things? I'm going to lay out all the things of my past history. Because
Yeah.
it starts from like how you were born to like any abuse that you experienced. It was the first time I'd shared that with anyone. And she was literally reading this. I remember her face at my kitchen table, and she's like, oh, we got some work to do.
Of course.
But in the first session, I felt my leg reburning. I went back to the dermatologist 2 days later, and he said, "What did you do?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You're not going to scar." He said,
Hmm.
"There's like no burn." He said, "What did you do?" I said, "Cranial sacral therapy." He goes, "Oh, okay." I was like, and I was like, "All right, allopathic
Yeah,
meets Eastern," but
exactly.
it was such an enlightening experience. And so she really supported me for the first few years through a lot of the somatic work of
Mm.
working through my tissue. And then I started uh, in 2016, after I was bought out of my e-commerce company. Because after my film came out, I then got the opportunity to become president of an e-com company. Did that for 2 years, went through a successful exit, but at the time I didn't see it as successful. I felt like I had
Mhm.
lost my business. I felt so brokenhearted. Was in such a place of blame and shame and comparison, feeling like a failure because I didn't see it as a positive. And I that was when I went to uh, when I was looking for coaching modalities, and I found NLP. And
Okay.
it was when I found NLP, timeline therapy, and hypnosis that again, it was another one of those like aha, like
Mhm.
this is a thing. This is something that it can definitely serve and help people. And that was what was the catalyst for my coaching business, because when I went through timeline therapy and experienced that and literally reprogrammed 14 generations
Mhm.
of anger, and for the first time in my life had the most amazing peace, where I was like, I no longer felt this like, not that I was always like trigger happy, I wasn't, but like, you
Mhm.
know how sometimes you would fall or have an experience and you're like, that was a bigger reaction than I think was really necessary, but like,
Mm.
why was it so big? And what timeline therapy does is it basically takes the Jenga set of the gestalt of your negative emotions, and you basically take that bottom block out, and it topples the whole thing down.
Yeah.
So then when the next time you ever get angry, because it doesn't mean that you'll never experience an emotion of anger or sadness or fear or grief, but then you're not adding another block to the entire gestalt. You're just putting one block down, and then you can clear that out later. And so it was one of the most healing experiences going through that
Mm.
process. And then that allowed me to really deeply serve my clients in coaching.
Yes, indeed. And the fact that through your healing journey, all of this goes back to just deep introspection and self reflection that you did on yourself. But also, Kimberly, I notice how you're cultivating such resilience along this journey. And so you've compared yourself, even when we talk to each other offline, as a phoenix who has risen from the ashes. And so, how do you, or how have you, Kimberly, learned how to cultivate both grief and resilience? So, how do you cultivate resilience in the face of the adversity, the trauma, the grief you experienced? And when you're coaching your clients and just different aspects, specifically in getting them to share their story, what do you share with them about how to cultivate resilience in the midst of all of that?
I think it depends on what they're going through.
Hmm.
Based on, I'll share something different for a client who's having a struggle with a business partner than I will if
Yeah.
they are, going through healing their relationship with their child, that
Hmm.
from being a single mom and having to leave an abusive dad. There's going to be different stories that are shared. I think the
Of
biggest
course.
thing with resilience, though, is there is a belief, especially with high achievers, and especially with those who have gone through trauma
Hmm.
and who put on a lot of armor. And there's a lot of armor, there's a lot of protection
Hmm.
because there is an identity of being strong. And God forbid anything hits you that makes you feel weak. So, what can happen though is it prevents you from being vulnerable. It prevents you from truly opening your heart and loving and opening up fully. So one of the things that I see that's the counterbalance of resilience is great so long as you continue to live open-heartedly. And that can be a hard counterbalance because so often when we armor ourselves and protect ourselves because we're so resilient and we live into this identity of being strong, that unfortunately it prevents us from actually recognizing our weaknesses because that's not something we want to avoid that. We want to avoid anything that makes us feel weak or less than or a victim or it puts us in any space where we are not in that identity of being strong. And so what I look at with my clients is I'm looking at what is the story that they're telling themselves? Like what is the story around being weak, around being vulnerable, around being supported? Because unfortunately, a lot of times when you're in that identity of being strong, and I've seen this with countless business owners,
Mhm.
when you're in that identity of being strong, you're not asking for support because if you ask for support, that means you need help. And if you need help,
Mhm.
then that means you're weak.
Mhm.
And that can create a whole ripple effect that causes hyper control, hypervigilance inside of the business that prevents it from
Yeah.
actually growing. Because in order to grow, you actually need support and you actually need to reach out and you actually need to grow beyond the hyper independence and grow into interdependence. And
And
so
so how specifically did you learn that? Was it through the different modalities you experienced, or did it look different according to what phase and stage you were in your life?
it definitely looked different according to the phase and stage, because I think
Mhm.
where I was really cracked open was when I fast forward, my coaching business started taking off. We end up being in Australia in March
Mhm.
of 2020. My husband's appearing at a convention there with the cast of The Walking Dead because he's a voice actor. And
Oh,
so we go around and do those cons and things. And
yeah.
he's and like, they're super fun. And as the global pandemic's breaking out, I figure the universe has a massive sense of humor because we're hanging out with
Uh-huh.
the Walking Dead cast.
The irony of that. You're so right.
Right? And
You're
so
right.
we literally land in the Gold Coast the day Tom Hanks announces that he has COVID.
Mhm.
And
I remember that day.
I'm looking at the Gold Coast and I'm looking at the exchange rate and I'm like, this is nice. Like everybody in that area was just like pretty like there wasn't this energy of fear. Like it
Okay.
wasn't that people weren't being cautious and aware, but there wasn't this pervasive energy of fear. And I remember asking my husband, like my husband was just joking with me one day. He's like, "What if we stayed?" And I was like,
Mhm.
"Yeah, I love that." And he was like, "Wait, what?" And
Ah.
we'd always wanted to live abroad and we'd always wanted to live in Australia specifically. And we figured, why not live into our dream than in the midst of
Mhm.
a global pandemic? No better time. And so that's what we did. But simultaneously, we did that knowing that we
Mhm.
wouldn't be able to come home, like even for a funeral.
Mhm.
And we were over there, and about 9 months later, my father has to go to the hospital, and
Mm.
he passes away.
My
And
goodness.
and then I'm also pregnant with our second child. And then simultaneously within that year, I not only grow my business 150%, have a baby, lose my father, lose my aunt, lose my grandma, lose my childhood friend, and lose my father's best friend within 1 year.
Ooh. Okay, pause right there. Kimberly, that's an awful lot.
Yeah.
In the midst of these changes, how in the world is it that you're sitting here today telling us about it? But in that moment, take us to that moment when you were going through that. Despite all of the prior healing you had experienced, Kimberly, be real with us because you have been so transparent in everything. But how in the world did you keep it together?
I didn't. I let
Mm,
myself fall apart. And
mm,
that was the best piece because the phoenix rising from the ashes only becomes a phoenix when they completely crumble and get destroyed.
mhm,
My identity of who I had been, and the thing that happens when you lose a parent. And I've asked so many people and so many friends who have lost parents, and especially when you lose somebody who you've had a complex relationship. Like my relationship with my father was very complex. Toward the end of his life, I was so grateful to have my sober, awesome dad back. But I mean, there were years, decades of challenge. And that experience of being able to like also know that it was perfect timing. Like it was it felt so meant to be. And like I had the simultaneous crumbling, but
Mm-hmm.
I also felt my father's soul and spirit and who he was beyond his own addiction, which stemmed from his own childhood abuse of every form,
Mm-hmm.
and his own challenges that he'd had. And I had so much compassion for him in that moment because suddenly I realized, wow, that the times when my dad was at his worst as an alcoholic was right in between the times of losing both of his own parents, both of
Mm-hmm.
which he had a very complex relationship with his family. Like his mom kidnapped him from his dad for 2 years
Oh my.
and sexually abused him.
Mm.
And so I'm like, well, no wonder he used the tool because I do believe we're all using the resources. We're all doing the best that we know that we can with the resources that we have available. His only resource was alcohol to numb the pain. And I had so much compassion for him in being able to have that awareness because I was pregnant. So there wasn't anything I couldn't cope with anything. I couldn't have
Mm-hmm.
any substance or anything to help numb anything. So I was very open and like this live wire. And I allowed myself to be very transparent with my community, very transparent with my family, and very open about grief and navigating through that process. And then the challenges of also doing that abroad, 8,000 miles away from my family. And that experience really taught me of the consistency of the pattern of change of death
Mm-hmm.
and resurrection,
Mm-hmm.
of how constantly, like just these past 75 days, like I've been on the 75 hard journey.
Mm-hmm.
And back in May, I had a very, no, not May, or April, I had a very, very early miscarriage.
Oh,
And
I'm sorry.
it
Mm.
was, I'm so grateful for that experience. Like that little
Mm-hmm.
soul, like ignited something within me that I needed to remember. It woke me up
Mm.
from a transition because after coming back from Australia, moving, we then moved again into like manifested our dream home, moved again, and finally we're settled. And that's when grief really hit. Like 2023
Mm-hmm.
was a hard year for me because suddenly I was no longer needed to be in motion for safety. I was actually planted in my home. Like I had my mom with me. She's now our nanny for our kids. Like she's the granny.
Oh,
Like
that's
my
perfect.
it's perfect. My
Yes.
husband's here. Like we had suddenly we got on this other side of like the pendulum swung from like terrible grief to a whole bunch of receiving. And my body was not able to actually fully receive it because I was so stuck in the grief and
Mm-hmm.
in the guilt and the sadness. And it wasn't until I started really unlock, and that caused me to be stuck in some patterns that were just complacent, quite frankly, in 2023. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy I saw that. And quite frankly, I got fat. I was like, one day I woke up, I turned around, I was like, is that back fat? Like, what is that?
Ah.
And and then I found out that I had was pregnant, and then I had a very early miscarriage.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in that moment with that little soul that I was like, oh my God, thank you. Thank you for again the reminder of the consistency of change,
Mm-hmm.
of the death and rebirth cycle. And I knew that in that moment I had to rebirth who I was. I knew that who I was then was not the person who was going to achieve my goals. And that allowed me to come out of this like grief coma that I had been in for a year,
Mm.
because prior to that I was in like high achiever, go go go, the fight mode. I had
Yeah.
that. I was on pure sympathetic, and that allowed me to recognize I'd done enough of the freeze. I'd done enough of the
Mm-hmm.
resting, and now it was time to come back into that place of balance and oscillation. And the
So,
past 75 days have been extraordinary. We've got
yeah,
like my company has doubled. We have been able, like, our book is done. It's coming out on September 30th. Like,
exactly.
I have a
Mm-hmm.
children's book in the works as well. And like, suddenly this like reignition of creativity
Mm-hmm.
has birthed through. And I'm so grateful because of that little soul. And like,
Yeah.
that's the thing, is when we look at these challenges as, allowing us to have the emotion of grief, allowing us to have that emotion, the feelings in the moment, and then recognizing, and this is the question I ask all my clients, and it sometimes makes them want to punch me in the face, where I'm like, how is this the best thing that ever happened to
That's
you?
right. Yeah. True transformation, in my opinion, does happen when you've not only gone through something that you just don't think that you'll be able to get out of, but when you do and you learn so much from the process of it, it makes you stronger. Because, I've shared a little bit of my story, but that grief and chronic illness and heartbreak and everything else is just one big cocktail, which has morphed into who I am today. And one thing that you said, Kimberly, that I think is so pivotal is that you said that prior to your father's passing, you also felt compassion for him. And that leads me to the area of compassion and forgiveness, because someone could be watching or listening and say, how in the world could this woman, yeah, she talks a good talk, but there's no way that she could feel compassion for an abuser. So, Kimberly, in that same light, what did compassion and forgiveness of your father, how did it enhance your life and take you to where you are now?
Mm. I love this question, Alethea, because I know the power, like I have seen what my story has been able to do. I have literally I'm going to take you back. I'm going to take you
Mhm.
back to 2018. So
Sure.
2018, my dad is sober now for a year. He has had so many revelations. He went to the hospital one time, died, and was brought back to life. And had a total near-death experience. And I went off on this, I went off to a Brendan Bouchard live event.
Oh, yeah.
And Lewis Howes had spoken, and he spoke about his experience of sexual abuse. And Brendan got up on stage and was like, all right, now everyone, I want you to gather into groups and share about your experience of what was the hardest thing you had to overcome. And so I'm there, my client's there with me, another friend of mine who I know is there, and we all have very similar stories. And I see this guy out of the corner of my eye, and I'm like, he's looking over at me, and I'm looking over at him, and I'm like, come on into our group. And he's like, I'm like, I just feel this call
Mhm.
that he needs to be in our group. And so we gather in, and we all start going around round robin and sharing our most challenging story. I shared the story of my father sexually abusing me as a child. Um, and my client shared her story of emotional abuse, and my friend, who was also a coach, shared his story of being sexually abused in the military. And then it got to this guy, and I look at this guy, and I can tell, I'm like, he is gonna bullshit. I
Mhm.
just knew he was going to tell some
Uh-huh.
bullshit story. And I'm looking
Mhm.
at him, and I just give the mom look. You know, the mom look. And suddenly he looks down, and his eyes, and he starts to cry. And
Oh.
he shares for the first time that when he was 12 years old, he was raped,
Mm.
and turns into a full breakthrough, full absolute breakdown. And so me and the other coach, we take him out into the room, and we just work with him in a coaching way, not going into the why, not going into the past, but going into some
Mhm.
somatic things of when you're having that full breakthrough, how to move the placement of your tongue so you can actually breathe and allow for the process, just allow for the somatics to move through, focus on, what brought you here, what brought you to this moment, what do you this is a huge breakthrough. And we coached him through for about an hour.
Mhm.
And that moment, there was something so beautifully profound in that moment. And I walk away, and I just have this intuitive hit to call my dad. And we're on a really good terms at this point. And I call him, and I said, Dad, I said, I know you still feel shame and guilt for what you did when I was a kid. I said, but I think we just saved a life today.
Mhm.
And it wouldn't have been had you not done what you did. And now I personally believe in soul contracts. And I think that my dad and I had an agreement before he came onto this planet. Because in that space, what he did to me gave me superpowers to see things in other people and to extract things and to have that built-in bullshit meter.
Mm.
And fast forward, my dad passes. It's 2021. I'm still in contact with this gentleman from the conference, and we're just on a Zoom and catching up. And I'm like, over the years, I've watched his smile change on, his Facebook picture, and suddenly he's like bright and like illuminated and just beautiful, like the light. He was cracked open that day, and he said, "Kim," he goes, "You saved my life."
Mm.
And I said, "Oh, well, thank you." I mean, and he goes, "No, Kim, I don't think you realize, like, I was planning my suicide for that night." And he said, "I prayed as I walked into that event. If this doesn't work, give me a sign that there's more for me."
Mhm.
And that was it. And that, had I not had the love for my father to like forgive him, to see how that happened for me and not just to me, then I wouldn't have been able to save his life.
That's right.
And so when I think of forgiveness, I think in the space of, there are things that happen to you in your childhood, especially, that are not your fault, but they are your responsibility to process them. And it's your job as an adult and in the process of transformation to see how everything that happened to you, you can alchemize and be
Mhm.
for the greater good to serve humanity. And that is what I learned from my father. And that's why I have so much compassion for him. And that's why I forgave him.
That is another level that I understand, that I hear you completely. I truly do. And my hope is that someone listening or watching who may not even be at that level yet can at least hear what you said and at least have an idea or a thought of perhaps saying, if Kimberly could get to a point like that, maybe I can too. And the fact that you help people share their stories through podcast guesting is absolutely incredible, because there are some people who don't think that they have a story to share. But I think, on the contrary, I think, yes, everybody has something valuable and insightful to share, but you're actually taking it now to even another level through a book that you're writing.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that book.
So the book is called Make Every Podcast Want You: How to Become So Radically Interesting You'll Barely Keep from Interviewing Yourself.
I love that title. Oh my gosh, it's straightforward. I know what it is. I'll be picking up to read.
Yeah. So it's all about, yes, we go into podcast strategy. Yes, we go into like what podcasts you want to pitch to. Yes, we go into like definitely go over the 10 pitch commandments, because I'm
Mhm,
sure you, like me, Alethea, like having a podcast, like you
mhm.
get some bad pitches.
Mm, yes. I'm going through I literally have right now, and this is no exaggeration, I have approximately 200 requests for people that want to be on my show. And I am sifting through, because bless their hearts, but everybody isn't a good fit.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And
Mhm,
it's understanding how to position yourself with the
mhm,
influence where people see that you're a good fit. Like, I had one amazing podcast guest who, my intuition was like she could be a great guest, but how she was pitched by her agency, it wasn't ours,
mhm.
was very much was
Wasn't
that
ours.
it wasn't ours, was that she wanted to empower women. And like, we have a top 2% ranking podcast with Crown
Mhm,
Yourself. Like, we've been around since 2019. Like,
mhm.
empowering women is not enough at this point. Like, we've done
Yeah.
nearly 300 episodes of women who have like built $30 million companies and
Mhm,
traveled the world and then created programs to help single mothers escape from financial codependency. Like, that's the level of empowering women. I need to see results.
That's
And so,
right.
but I was curious about this woman and I look her up and I'm like, she spoke at the UN. Like,
Wow.
eh, yeah, and that wasn't in her pitch. And that she was a burlesque dancer. That wasn't in her.
Oh,
I
that's
know, badass,
interesting.
right?
Yeah.
Interesting. And that's the thing is like if you don't position yourself looking at all the amazing quirks, the challenges that you face, the beauty that you have, like there are intricacies within your story that
Hmm.
make you unique and interesting and different. I can tell you I get so many, like I just saw three today that were like, I'm into empowering women. I'm like, that's great. Like that doesn't separate you from anything. So being
Hmm.
specific with your language and how you pitch so that you can get on these other shows. But also the biggest part of this book that I want to convey is like how to tell your story. And so many people, I love that you mentioned this, that people discount their story. And I
Hmm.
had this asked to me by a client of ours, Megan Camille, on one of her summits. And she said, well, Kim, what about those who don't have like this big trauma story, like this big dramatic, story of,
Hmm.
but, maybe they were just like a middle child and felt really ignored and had to, create art in order to be able to feel seen. And I was like, that's a story
Yeah.
because so
Yeah.
many people invalidate their story because it's not enough. They have this perception that it's not enough. Your story is exactly enough for who needs to hear it. I mean, yes, I have a lot of stuff in my story,
Hmm.
but that's not going to resonate with everybody, especially those who haven't had a lot of stuff in their story necessarily. But I know that by somebody else going on a podcast who's the middle child who just felt a little passed over and ignored and had to be creative, that's someone who's going to resonate with those same people.
Hmm.
So being aware of like how your story is connecting with your ideal customer audience, with your ideal audience, the people that you are designed and put on this planet to serve. And I had
Hmm.
this conversation with a coaching client of mine years ago who was starting her coaching business and I was super excited to support her. And then she was like looking at kind of the similarities of what we do. And she's like, well, Kim, she goes, why go through all this trouble of starting a business?
Hmm.
Like it's a lot. Like, and she's like, what if I just referred people to you? And I was like, look, I'll always take the referral, but I won't take it from out of a place of, acquiescence
That's
to your
right.
own dream.
Hmm.
Um, because this was a woman who had spent 30 years in a medical profession. And I was like, there are people who will trust you as a coach more than they'll trust me with no college degrees. Even though I've coached 5 PhDs at this point, like there are people who will trust your longevity and your background in the medical field
Hmm.
that won't have the same trust for me in that space. That's
Hmm.
why you need to be doing this because I'm not going to be able to reach those people, but you will.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, I never thought of it that way before.
Yeah.
And I think when you recognize and stop invalidating the pieces of your story because you're where you're at, that's exactly where you're at to serve somebody right at that level who needs your
That's right.
support.
And it's that heart, it's the art of human connection. People
Mhm.
negate human connection. They may not think that they're worthy enough because their story isn't so grand, but it doesn't have to be. As long as you have that hook, that's
Mhm.
something that's going to cause a person to just light up and say, I could really learn something from this person, or that person can inspire me to do extraordinary things. And I think sometimes even entrepreneurs fail to think about that. Yeah, okay, you've created this tech company, but who are you? That's what
Mhm.
really is the hook and the buy in. So, how can even entrepreneurs, Kimberly, use their story to even enhance their brand and connect with their audience and clients on a deeper level?
Well, we've been learning from stories since the dawn of time.
Mm,
And because our unconscious minds recognize patterns, like we are pattern recognizing machines as unconscious minds. And so when you can tell your story in a specific pattern, and I give you the 7 story archetypes, there's only 7
mm,
in the book. And the main 3 that I've seen for entrepreneurs are overcoming the monster, rags to riches, and the quest. And each of those types of storylines have a very specific arc. And if you go back and listen to podcasts, go listen to like my story, very much overcoming the monster of the initial monster of my father, the monster of my own beliefs, the monster of my own self. And then constantly that overcoming the monster story shows up that is resonant with those other people who have had some form of monster in their story that they've had to overcome. The same is true for the rags to riches. That's very much the entrepreneur story. But those patterns, those are archetypal patterns that resonate with our unconscious minds. If you want to resonate on an unconscious hypnotic level with your customer to get them to have unconscious buy-in to your products, your services, and who you are, tell a story and understand what story you're telling, like a rags to riches story that you started out with nothing, started from, the back of your car and built a, $10 million company or however large, six figures, whatever.
That's right.
Whatever you've built, that's the rags to riches journey. That's the one that many people will also resonate with. Same with the quest, where suddenly, and I see this one with parents, parents who see their kid is having a struggle and they go on a quest. They study science. They find new opportunities, new things that they can bring in to bring that healing back, or those tools back to support their children. Like one of our clients, Kashif Khan, built $100 million company, and he has been able to, his story of his children was what was really the catalyst of him seeing this need for parents. And that he went on the quest to find the answers with DNA. And so that's the power of stories, when you can start looking at what is the story that my audience most resonates with? What's the story that my story already is, like the archetype? And then how can I tell my story in this archetypal fashion that allows people to resonate with this? And when we start noticing those patterns, people unconsciously gravitate towards story. By just saying, can I tell you a story? Automatically, it converts short-term memory into long-term memory. It activates a little bit of dopamine and serotonin in your brains, because our brains are literally wired for storytelling.
Wow.
And so whatever story you have, wherever you have, whatever you have been through, small, large, big, grand, don't judge it for where you're at, because what you're doing is you're actually able to serve exactly who you need from the story that you've already cultivated to your, for your life up to this point. And yeah, you're going to keep growing your story, because you're not dead. You're going to keep growing. There's going to be more story, and it's going to evolve. But looking at your story as far as where you've come to now and that arc, that's when your ideal client, especially for business owners, will see you as the guide, because they will be like, oh, they've gone to the land and gotten the knowledge and brought it back, where they've gone and overcome the monster. And I need to know how to have those tools to overcome the monster. Or they've gone and from rags to riches, and whatever they did along that journey, I need to have that too. And so for coaches, service-based providers, even like tech businesses, the product is the solution that they've discovered on their quest. And so it positions the product, your services, and you as the guide, as the leader, to guide them on their journey, allowing your audience to see themselves as the hero.
Wow. You all, Kimberly has dropped some nuggets of wisdom and jewels, and I don't want her to stop there. I want anybody out here who says, you know what? I'm ready to do more podcast guesting. I'm ready to show up more in my life and show up for others. So, Kimberly, if someone wanted to connect with you, how can the audience reach you?
If you love podcasts like this, you can head on over to the Crown Yourself podcast. You can go to crownyourself.com/podcast and subscribe for our podcast all about shifting your subconscious mind and creating your empire. If you want to know specifically about how to guest on more podcasts and better share your stories, then you can head on over to communicationqueens.com/podcast and subscribe to our Communication Queen podcast. And if you are interested in how to make every podcast want you, so that you can share your story and be so radically interesting, whether on a podcast or just around the campfire sharing your story, then go head on over to makeeverypodcastwantyou.com and grab the book.
Wow. Kimberly, as a closing question, I'd like to ask you this. You're walking down the street and you meet the childhood version of yourself. You see her. At that moment, she has no idea who she will become. What do you do in that moment when you see her? Can be anything.
Oh
It
my
could be
gosh.
words. It doesn't have to be words, but you see her. And now the two of you are standing face to face. What happens in that moment?
I feel this like every time I see a little girl, like every time.
Mm.
Um, and with my boys too, but more so like just as a like, and in that moment, oh, I would just smile at her and just let her know how proud I am of her and how her words have inspired me. I literally tattooed them on my arm. It says, just run through it. And I found that from a video of me when I was 4 years old, maybe 5. And my mom was asking, I was playing with my friend and she was like, how do you get through the water forest? And there was this big story around like the bay. We were in the backyard and we had the sprinklers going, but it was a water forest and it was dangerous and perilous. And I looked at my mom with the most defiant, like resolve in my eyes. And I was like, simple, just run through it. And I saw that girl and I'm like, that girl. I'm so proud of who I have become because I feel I have integrated that version of me into who I am now.
Mm. Perfectly said, perfectly stated. Continue sharing your story, Kimberly. Continue to be a light in this world. Always know your worth, your value. You have meaning. You have truly blessed me today. And I know that you have enhanced and blessed the lives of so many others. And it has truly been my honor having you here on the Power Transformation Podcast. And I will say this publicly, you all, is that Kimberly, she does not expect me to say this, but I want to publicly thank you and your agency for sending me guests that I didn't even ask for. It came out of the blue. And I just want to put it out there that you and your team did not have to do that. But from the bottom of my heart, thank you to you, Joe, Anna, and everybody else at your agency. You have no idea how humbling that is that you all see something in me where you are willing to send clients over to my show. And thank you, because in this world, so many people hoard and keep things for themselves, but there's so much abundance out there for everybody. And so I want to just publicly, in front of everyone, thank you, Kimberly, for taking time to even do that for me. Thank you.
You are so welcome. It is such our pleasure. And we absolutely believe with what you're doing in this show, the voice that you have and the light that you are to this world. And so, of course, we will share our clients with you and let them be in your space and see what magic happens, because we all heal in relationship and we all grow in relationship. And I'm excited to grow our relationship beyond the scope of this podcast and see what magic gets created.
And same here, Kimberly. Thank you. If you enjoyed today's show, then you don't want to miss an episode. So follow the Power Transformation Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you usually listen, and remember to rate and review. I also invite you to connect with me on social media at Alethea Felton. That's at ALETHEAFELTON. Until next time, remember to be good to yourself and to others.